Today I want to talk about my passion for the UFC. So now the UFC has become one of the most watched sport in the world. And I think it's because the UFC, it's such a pure sport, MMA, mixed martial arts. And it kind of traces back in the times of the gladiators in the Colosseum. So you can see right here, the Colosseum right here with gladiators with a sword and people, the people who got defeated simply died. And here I have a picture of the Colosseum. So it was really crazy times, and the UFC is kind of restoring that without the death. It's like a very, very pure sport, and people have a primal fascination for that sport. And I think that's why it's going to become more and more popular in the coming years. And maybe one day become the most popular sport because it is so pure. It is so violent too. It's like boxing or tennis. It's kind of like a simplified version of a fight. It's still two fighters, but they fight, through a tennis court, or they fight through a boxing ring with some very set rules. And mixed martial arts also has its rules, but it is a little bit less stringent on the rules. And it is, for now, the closest version to an actual fight. So today I want to share two channels I think are worth watching in the UFC. So the first one is from Patrick Gavia, and he's a guy that quit his job last year to become a full-time YouTuber, to make documentaries on the UFC. And he really makes insanely high-quality videos. I watched this one, the Francis Ngannou documentary. It was so good. I watched also this one, the Khabib documentary, also awesome. 40 minutes. This one 30 minutes. It's pretty long for YouTube, but the quality is simply insane. So I think he made a crazy bet, but I think he's having a lot of success and a lot of fun in that career switch. And he has a very clearly defined also YouTube, clearly defined niche, MMA documentaries. And you can see the power of the UFC. This guy probably, gets paid with sponsors and stuff like that. And he's surfing on that trend of the UFC. So the UFC needs to be very popular for him to get money from the sponsors and get views. And you can see that the amount of views he gets, like 2.3 million, 2.9 million, 2.1 million, is like 3 million here is like huge amount of views in that niche. So, this guy is really worth watching. The second channel I watch is Henry Cejudo. So he calls himself Triple C because he's an Olympic gold medalist and also 2-division UFC champion. And what I like about his videos is like he's a very technical guy. He analyzes fights like no other people. He really checks the statistics of both fighters and dig into the strengths and weaknesses of each, along with his own experience as a fighter. So I remember he made a few bets on certain fights, the Jon Jones fights. He made another bet in boxing, Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia. And most of the time he's right in his prediction because he's a veteran in fighting. And I love his quantitative approach in what he does. It's very, very detailed. He takes as much information as possible to make his prediction. So it's a little bit like a data scientist or a quant in the financial markets. He's taking all of that data and then making predictions on who he thinks is gonna win. And sometimes he makes mistakes, but I think 80% of the time he's actually correct. So that's a guy that I love watching his technical analysis is really the highest level. And I feel like, I simply learned so much from him. And actually that brings us to this guy, Nate Latshaw. So I found today this guy on Twitter, and he's a data scientist in the niche of MMA and the UFC. So he also has a clearly defined niche, which is very good. My channel, it's mostly, it doesn't have yet a niche, or it could be personal development and lifestyle, stuff like that. But it's not as well defined as those guys who are really specialists in the UFC. And for example, there's a fight tomorrow of Charles Oliveira, the former lightweight champion, versus Beneil Dariush, and he made this data analysis of strengths and weaknesses of both fighters. So for example, if you click here, you can see that it is pretty interesting. You see that the first line here is the number of fights. So you see that Oliveira has more experience, 42 fights versus 27. And it also shows an interesting line here, recent form. What is his latest momentum, latest result? Often in stock investing, you look at what was the performance recently of a company to see the future performance. So that is very interesting. Both have roughly the same momentum since January of 1st, 2019. 8 wins for 1 loss, and he has 7 wins. So there's one thing to note here. The last fight of Charles Oliveira was a loss. So it's still the clearest memory is a loss for Charles Oliveira. And if you know a little bit about psychology, a loss can have a tremendous impact on your momentum. It can break completely your momentum. So that could be information that is not necessarily well outlined here. So be careful about that. Then you have the win percentage, KO percentage. So they have roughly the same percentage. They roughly won 80% of the fights. Number of wins by knockout. Charles Oliveira is a little bit better at knocking out opponents, 27%. So here, KO defense, percentage of losses not by knockouts. So the higher percentage this one is, the higher they have a KO. They have KO defense. So this one is 56%. So it is higher for Oliveira. Submission percentage of wins. So you can see here that Oliveira is a master at submission. 64%. And then submission defense. So the higher here, the higher the submission defense. So here it is 56%. So it is relatively high, but Dariush has even a higher submission defense at 75%. So he's very good at protecting the submissions. You can also see that Oliveira has a very high submission percentage. So it could be, very interesting here, because even though he has a high submission defense, this guy is a submission king. So it might not be enough to have 75% here. And what I liked about the data analysis here is that he put actually those different lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, actually 5 lines here. The percentage actually, the 5 data points here, and he put it in this diagram right here, and you can see that Oliveira seems actually to have an edge according to that data. And Dariush is actually just a little bit better at submission defense, right here. So from that data, it seems like I would say Oliveira is a little bit better, but also remember that he has a loss, recently. That could have a big impact. So for example, if you follow a little bit the UFC, you remember that Usman, who, like was a big favorite at minus 245, but still lost to Leon Edwards. He was a shell of a version of, in that latest fight. So that loss really impacted him. So if you're interested in my analysis of Kamaru Usman's loss, you can check my other channels as a quant artist. But here, actually, let's take a look at the odds of Charles Oliveira versus Dariush odds. Who's the favorite? So you can see that Dariush is a favorite at minus 145 and Oliveira is at plus 125. So it seems that even though from that diagram, it looks like actually if Oliveira has I would say a slight edge compared to Dariush. Dariush just has a little bit more submission defense. Oliveira is also more experienced, but maybe people are pricing in that loss that might affect the mental of Oliveira much more than we think. What I would say is that I trust much more Henry Cejudo's analysis than this guy. But what is interesting, I think, from a data scientist point of view, is to mix, whatever his predictions are from the hard data with professional fighters like Henry Cejudo. If you could mix, the data and some fighters' intuition, maybe 10 fighters or 5 fighters that are highly skilled, I think you could have a very good model to bet on betting platforms like DraftKings. So really what I want to say in this video is, the rise of the quantitative methods even in the UFC. Because the world is governed by science. And, in financial markets, you have all those hedge funds, those trading firms that make money in mispricings in the market. They buy low and they sell high and they make money from that. And, sports betting platforms are also kind of like a trading platform. If there's a mispricing, other people will take advantage of it. And, here the platform puts Dariush as the favorite. And I remember I watched a video about Cejudo saying that he also places Dariush as a favorite. So, it seems that this data from that data scientist is not that complete. But let's say you had a more complex model than this very rudimentary model. It probably maybe places Beneil Dariush as a favorite. But by how much? And that's the whole question. And what I want to say is that quantitative methods or data science does not only apply to, finance and the UFC. It applies actually to everything. It also applies to YouTube channels. What are the popular topics? And if you could grab those popular topics, what are the criteria that allow to make a successful videos? And with all the data out there, you can probably know what will make your video popular. So I think the advice from that video is really to take this more quantitative approach in everything you do in life. You need to quantify. For example, let's say you go for a run. Now, a lot of people have smart watches to look at their pace and really how they performed along different metrics, as a pace, as a heartbeat, etc., to really see how they perform. And I think it's a good thing because it allows you to take better control of your body, to take better decisions. And I think I'm gonna make later a video about the rise of data in YouTube and how it impacted the the YouTube culture and how nowadays to succeed on YouTube, you need to use data. You need to say you need to have a quantitative mind. For example, if each video you make is about a popular topic that is recently trending, you'll probably grow faster than if you do your own topics. That's that kind of stuff. And then popular topics are always moving, changing. So if you're not up to date, maybe you could have you have probably lost a few views or actually a lot of views if you did that topic that was unpopular instead of that popular topic. So data science is really extremely important recently. And the second other point I want to make in this video is that watching sports actually improved my life for the better, because when you have role models in your life, they influence the actions you're gonna take. And for me, watching sports or the UFC really motivated me to work out harder. Every time I watch a fight, I'm like, oh, I'm so psyched to go to the gym. I want to go for a run. And I even had the desire to sign up for a jiu-jitsu gym or practice a martial art. And it's because I watched so much of that stuff that I'm just in love with that sport. It's that I want to become like those fighters. And that's why I think it's so good to follow sports. It really influences the decisions you make. So yes, that is it for this video. I hope I shared some of my passion for the UFC. And I also hope that I gave you a taste of the quantitative approach to life. Because in our highly technological society, it's gonna only accelerate more and more and more. So make decisions wisely, and to do that, you need to back up with a lot of data. So that is it for today's video. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next video. Peace.